It's Create Day, my friends. Welcome back to another video. Today I am doing some thrift store makeovers with stamps and transfers and some different painting techniques. Let's get started. Up is this little picture that was in great condition. It does have the little like cork pads on the bottom, so I had to scrape those off of there, get it all cleaned up really well, and then I gave it a coat of my flat white spray paint as a base coat for the other paint that I'm going to be brushing on here. I forgot to tape off that inside section before doing this, so I kept my spray paint down low. Then when it was dry, I stuffed a plastic bag inside and taped it off so I could paint that top of the inside rim there. Now it's all dry. I've painted that part, and I'm going to pull that bag and tape out and start applying my fusion paint in the color Parchment. I'm doing one coat with a brush. On the top there, I want to get down in just a little under that rim, and after this coat is dry, I'm going to go back in with another coat using a sponge applicator. It will take away those brush marks, and it gives it a little bit of texture. Now with that first coat dry, I'm using the same paint with my sponge. I just have a round sponge applicator, getting off any excess paint and just dabbing around. It creates this really nice subtle texture that you can still go over it with, like stamps or transfers or whatever, but it just really gives it a very nice earthy look. Now I'm going to use the color Chateau, and for this step I will be using a moistened sea sponge instead of the round sponge brush. I'm going to dab this on just randomly over that parchment. I do not want to cover all of that. And while that is still wet, I will go in with some more of the parchment, and I'm blending those two together so you have each separate color, but then you also make like a new color by blending them while they're still wet. So to me, it gives it a really natural look. I did that same process on the top part of my picture where I had laid down the original paint. I'm going to use a transfer. This is IOD's Lover of Flowers. It's one of the new ones from this spring. And I got a few new things from them this year, but everybody was sold out of so much stuff, I ended up not getting a whole lot. But I think this little booklet of transfers is really pretty, and I'm looking forward to using them all. I'm just going to put this one single rose on there, and I'm keeping this, pretty simple. I don't want to overdo it. I taped it on in the position I wanted, and then I'm just using the transfer tool to apply this on there. And I did have to cut some little slits in between some of those leaves and whatnot to get it to go around the curve of the picture. It was a little bit challenging, but not impossible. I only ended up with a few little wrinkles, and I'm perfectly okay with that. Once that was all down, I removed that transfer sheet, and I noticed there were a few little spots where it hadn't really laid down all the way, even though it released from that transfer sheet for me. So I just carefully went back in and used that tool and then burnished the whole transfer with that transfer sheet. Now I'm going to seal this with DIY's Liquid Patina. This is my first time trying some of the DIY paints, and I'm excited that I'm finally getting to try some of their stuff. This does have a little bit more of a sheen than my other, like my matte varnish that I use, but I like both of them. I think this went on really nicely. It's easy to work with, and I do like the way it turned out. When that was all dry, I just took a piece of jute twine and tied that around the neck of it and added a little hang tag. Let me know what you think of this one, and if you have any questions, be sure to hit me up in the comments. Next project is this little washboard that had some blue little ducks on there. I need to get those off of here and get this cleaned up. I didn't know if this was going to work, but I took my little putty knife, I think is what it used to be. It's pretty old and rusty now. And I was very gentle about prying this up. I did not want to crack that wood underneath. And fortunately, it worked out. I just took my time and then it came right off. I'm going to fill the holes. I don't know what the holes were for. It was kind of odd. But anyway, I'm using Durham's water putty for this. You can use any type of wood filler, of course. And when that is dry, I will sand it down, and I'm going to sand down the whole board, well, the wood part of my little washboard. I will be leaving a list of all the items that I used in these projects today in my description box, as well as links to the things that I can get links to. Now the next thing I needed to address with this is that that top was kind of loose. It kind of wobbled on one end or on one side of it. So Titebond wood glue to the rescue. I just put a little bit under the end pieces and then clamped it together, wiped off the excess glue and let it dry, and that worked perfectly. I'm using some rubbing alcohol to clean off the metal front and that back piece as well, so that now we are going to be ready for paint. I put a coat of my matte varnish on here to help prevent the bleed through, because I changed my mind so many times on what color scheme I was going to do. So I do this, and then I end up spray painting it black, as you can see here. And so now I'm using Summer Crush by DIY. I thought I had a transfer all picked out for this color. Like, I thought this was going to just go the way I wanted it to go. But once the paint was on and dried, I just wasn't digging it. So I went ahead and sealed this with my matte clear sealer so that I could go ahead and go in with another paint and not reactivate the DIY paint. So now I decided to do a chippy finish. I want this orange to come through from underneath. So I'm taking a little votive candle and wiping that onto the edges and over the raised parts on the front and on the panels and the ends. And I really didn't put enough on here for the effect I wanted, but I did get a very chippy look. In fact, this piece is really, it's really rough. Oh my goodness. If you like super distressed, you'll probably like this. So now I'm going to apply my Dixie Belle mineral chalk paint in the color Buttercream. I always get my brush wet first because this paint tends to be really thick. So I end up having to do 2 coats of this, and then when that dries, we can go on to the next step. So now this is completely dry. It's time to start our chippy effect here. I'm using this little rubber scraper and a combination also with some sandpaper. And this is why I don't think I used enough of the candle wax, because it should have easily resisted that paint, and I had to really work at it to get the chippiness. And in some spots I kind of dug a little too hard, and then it went back down into the black paint, which I was okay with, but I would have preferred that it did not do that. So, this is the first time I've tried that, and I just need to practice some more so I can get a much uh, more realistic effect of the chippiness. Once I was done with that, I gave it a coat of my matte sealer. For the transfer, I'm using one from IOD's Seed Catalog. I just need to figure out how I want to configure this onto my washboard. I cut off the wording at the top, but I am going to use it. I'm just going to reposition it. And then I trimmed around the edges so that I could get this to fit on there. I had to lay it down and figure out what I needed to cut off and what I could leave. Just trimmed it to size to fit. Now to apply this, I decided, because of all the ridges on the washboard, it would be easier to do this in sections. So rather than cut the transfer into sections, I just trimmed off portions of the backing and did it that way. I did the flat panel first, and I really did try to tuck in around all those ridges to get as little cracking and separation as possible, but it was really difficult. So I did have all that, but that added to the rusticness of this. I just kept trimming off a small section at a time and working on that, getting it transferred on before moving to the next section. And see here, there's a little section there that did not transfer on, so I put that back down and made sure I got that rubbed on. Now when I was burnishing this, I was a little too aggressive, and I tore off a section just under the seeds sign amongst the greenery there. You can see how there's that open space amongst the greenery. And I'll have to fix that differently because it ruined the transfer piece. I couldn't get it restuck on there. So here's where I'm just placing down that text at the top that I had cut off so that I could reposition it. And then I will fix that section that I ruined by adding in some text to that as well. And right now I'm just adding some of the wording that I had trimmed off onto the right hand lower corner. And here's the piece that I'm going to add into the middle of that, so it almost looks like it was done on purpose. So now I'm applying Dixie Belle's Van Dyke Brown Glaze. I'm putting it just in those crevices where that transfer cracked, going over all the little ridged edges. But I didn't like how that looked by itself, so I went ahead and put it over the entire front of the washboard. I'm brushing it on and then wiping back the excess with a cloth. I decided I wanted to dress up the back of this a little bit, so I'm taking some scrap pieces from that transfer I used on the front, the little sections I had cut off, and I'm adding that to the back. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the same Van Dyke brown glaze on the back. I felt like the transfer was just a little too new looking for how distressed this was. So I took some fine grit sandpaper and I'm going over the transfer. In hindsight, I should have done this before I applied the glaze because when I get done with this, I will need to reapply that brown glaze. Now for the back, I want to do a little something else. So I got this idea to have these little clothespins hanging from some twine. And then you could have like little hangers for some pictures or notes or whatever you want. So it makes it somewhat useful as well as decorative. So I have some watered down dark brown paint that I am brushing on to these little mini clothespins and then wiping back with a baby wipe. I don't know where I got these because I don't have very many, so it's not like I bought them off of Amazon in bulk or anything. So I don't know. I don't know where they came from. So now I'm taking a piece of jute twine and I'm going to hot glue that into each corner, and then I can attach the clothespins to the jute twine. To attach the clothespins to the jute with my hot glue, I grabbed this piece of what I thought was wax paper. It's actually parchment paper. So the glue did stick to that, so I had to pull it out rather quickly. And at least at that point I was able to hold it with my finger for it to finish drying. And it did save me from getting the glue onto my washboard. Once I got that third one on there, I didn't like the way it was hanging. It was a little long on that left-hand side. So I just removed it and snipped off a little bit on the end and then reattached it with the hot glue. Now to dress up the corners there where I have that twine glued down, I'm taking these little brads I got from Hobby Lobby. They're kind of an antique brass look, I think. I snipped off the little brad legs, pressed the remainder into the center of the brad, and then attached one to each corner there where the jute twine is with my hot glue. After that, I cut out a black and white photo of a cute little baby with a spoon in its mouth, and it came out of a book I got from the thrift store. And I just clipped that onto one of the clothespins, and here's how this turned out. My next project is this cute little Adirondack chair. This was a little decor piece in my daughter's bathroom many, many years ago, and today's the day for its makeover. I removed all the stickers, got it all cleaned up, and then gave it a coat of my flat white spray paint. I wanted to use Fusion's parchment for this, but I could not get the lid off. My husband couldn't get the lid off. My daughter's boyfriend couldn't get the lid off. So I improvised and cleaned up a drill bit and made a hole in the cap that I could plug with a wine cork. I have a few corks in my little crafting collection, and there was one small enough that I wouldn't have to drill a big hole. So I did that. This is probably not a long-term fix, but for now, it's working. I can pull that cork out. It's a really tight fit, so it should last me a little while. Pour some of that paint into my cup and then put the cork back in. As it turned out, once I had this completely painted with that color, it was too white. So I went with Chateau instead and painted that over the parchment. For this one, I'm using another transfer from IOD's seed catalog. I'm laying this on here how I think it wants to go and then trimming up the edges so that I can get it better on there and see where I really need to trim it down so that it will fit properly. Once I had a pretty good fit, I went ahead and snipped the sides there where the back of the chair meets the seat, because I'm going to cut that in half and work separately rather than trying to do the whole transfer onto the chair like I did my little washboard. Before I apply it though, I'm using IOD's Decor stamp called Vintage Textures. This is the one I chose. I'm going to use their ink in Stone Gray. I'm inking up just a small section of this stamp. I'm going to tap it off onto a piece of paper. I want this to be really light, and then I will go ahead and apply this. I do go around the entire chair, like every part of it, the back, the inside bottom, the legs, inside and out, over the whole thing. I just want to add a little hint of texture. So now it's time to apply the transfer. I taped it down to keep it in place. And the main thing is, because of those little creases, I want to make sure I rub that down into the creases first before I transfer onto the remainder of the back of the chair. Now, I realize I'm using transfers for all three of these projects so far, but decoupage is a great option for this. In fact, on these more difficult surfaces, it would probably be a better option. So this is, mostly just for inspiration, and I already had these transfers, so I wanted to see if I could make this work. Now I did end up with a little bit of overhang on that seat. I tried to snip it as close as I could with my scissors, but then I just kind of had to rub it down and then scuff it up with my little piece of sandpaper. I'm going to use one more transfer from this set. I'm cutting it apart so that I can use that top floral on the top of my chair and the bottom one on the bottom of the chair. I didn't like the way this just cut off straight across on the top and the bottom, so I did want to add to that. I just think it makes it flow much better. Now I'm going to lightly scuff up this transfer, starting with the little indentations between the slats. I just folded my sandpaper in half so that I would have a nice little stiff edge to stick in there, and then I went over the rest of it, just lightly scuffing and then going over the outside where I did the stamping. So everything is muted down a little bit. Now to add some age to those recessed areas, I'm taking IOD ink in the color Stone Gray, the same color I did the stamping with. And I just put a little bit of that on my plate, and using a paintbrush, I'm going in and just painting in all those little indented slat areas. Since I had the transfer split on me, this will help fill that in and give it a nice aged and complete look. When that was done, I took the Stone Gray ink pad and went around the hard edges to add that same aged effect around the entire chair, just catching the edges. I then sealed this one with my Clear Matte Varnish. I used the DIY liquid patina on the picture, and I wanted to see how that compared with this one as far as the finishes, so that's why I did two different types of sealer. So like I said before, I like them both. It's just personal preference, I guess. So I went ahead and got this completely sealed, and then I made a hang tag for it. And I'm going to briefly show you how I did that because I used the scraps from these transfers that I had cut off. I'm starting with a little wood tag. These came from Amazon. They're a little bit smaller than the cardstock ones that you normally get, but I used some watered down brown paint like I did on the clothespins. And I'm brushing that on and then wiping it back with a baby wipe so it acts more like a stain. Then I did a little dry brushing with the color Cashmere. And when that was good and dry, I started applying my little scrap pieces of transfer. I just put 3 on here. I did one on that edge and, you know, rubbed it on, took the transfer sheet off and burnished it. And then I added another one on the other edge, same process. And then I added one in the middle. And then I just took some of the little leftover words that I had from the rose transfer that I did on the picture. I had originally thought I would use that on the picture, but I did not. So I added those to the middle of this hang tag, and that was it. It was like really simple, but just adds an extra little touch to my chair. I then tied that on with a little piece of jute twine, and here's how this one turned out. My final project is this little clay pot. I'm going to paint this like I did the picture, only I'm going to start with Chateau and then come in with parchment as the added color to it instead of the other way around. I did the first coat by brushing it on. The second coat I'm doing the sponge technique just like I did on the picture, and now I'm adding in parchment. I'm going to use one of my Apothecary label stamps. This is one of the new IOD stamp sets. And what I'm going to do is make a label in the center out of my Tim Holtz decoupage paper. I'm going to use the IOD Stone Gray ink to stamp this image onto that paper in the spot that I want the center portion to show through, so that then I can cut this out and have that center portion fit inside the stamp, if that makes sense. It'll make sense once you see it. So I stamp that on so I can cut this out, and then I can kind of fussy cut around there until it fits perfectly inside that stamp, the middle section of the stamp. Once I initially cut it out, I fit it back in there to see how much more I need to trim off to get it to fit just a little bit better. And so that's how it will look once this is on my little clay pot. I'm inking up the stamp with that stone gray and doing the best I can to get it on there, holding it in place while getting a good impression. But this color was a little bit too light, but I will go back over it with black, so that's okay. I'm adding some Mod Podge to the center section so that I can put down that little piece of paper that I cut out from the Tim Holtz decoupage paper. I'm going to smooth that down and then go over it with my brush with some Mod Podge on it. Now I'm taking StazOn ink in jet black. I'm going to ink up that stamp again. This time I attached it to a thin mount, which did make it easier to line that up with the previous stamp. I did get a little bit of a shadow of the previous stamp behind it because it wasn't perfectly lined up, but I actually kind of liked it. Like, it just gave it more character. So I stamped that on there, and look how easy that was. I did have one little spot that needed a little more attention, so I lined that back up. But this, that's so easy, and it turned out really cute. Now I am applying the Spanish copper rub and buff around the edges of my pot. When I was done with the rub and buff, I did do a clear coat of matte sealer, and then I added a little piece of floral foam and some moss and some little small white florals with a tea light. I didn't glue anything in because I wasn't sure what kind of arrangement I wanted to do with this. I just wanted something neutral for this video with this sitting on my little chair. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate each and every one of you. If you are new here and you find my content useful, I hope you will subscribe to my channel. But more importantly, I hope I've inspired all of you to go create something. See you next time.